Hello, TJ. Are you with us?
Yeah, hey.
Hey, TJ. So I'm excited to talk to you.
Cool, thanks.
Wanted to talk to you about your book, Failsafe. I know that this is a loaded question here a little bit, but how would you briefly tell our listeners what your novel, Failsafe, is about?
Well, it's about people from different walks of life kind of coming together and discovering that they're all a part of a deeper mystery or a deeper conspiracy that initially they kind of all just thought they were enemies and people from different backgrounds and different cultures. They had their prejudices about each other and their preconceived notions about each other and their things they didn't like about each other. And eventually, over the course of the book, they kind of realize that they have a mutual enemy and decide that they're going to go trying to take that mutual enemy down together.
Okay, so can you tell me a little bit about how the book was published?
Sure. It was published on Amazon. I actually met a young lady by the name of Raven Dodd, who is a book publisher and editor, and she helped me put the book together and get it published. And that process took about a year and a half. Most of the issues related to publishing had to do with binding the book and manufacturing the book and making sure everything laid out right and that the cover looked right and stuff. And then there was also an artist that designed the cover that was a part of that publishing process too.
Those are a couple of things I wanted to ask you about, like what the editing process was actually like.
Well, having somebody go over your art with a fine-tooth comb is difficult in the beginning. But I've written a few other books, and it was very, very difficult for me at the beginning because I was a very single-minded artist, and I wanted, my sentence to be my sentence, and I didn't want anybody messing with it. But really working with an editor and working with a creative partner on a big effort like this, because the book is, 130 some thousand words long. It's a long book. Really is helpful. And if you can swallow your pride and get over the issues with it, it's a lot better as a result.
And you just briefly touched there on the cover illustration. Once again, I'll just kind of hold it up for anyone that is viewing us. For anyone that's listening, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the cover illustration here.
Well, that's a picture of one of the characters from the book, Bama, who is famously known for being a sure shot with her pistol and just for being a real firecracker. She's very much in charge. She runs a brothel with her adoptive father, and she is sort of like the manager, the bouncer, and the salesperson at this brothel. And she's kind of the unlikely protagonist of the book, designed to be unlikely. I mean, maybe people spot that when they read the book and they say, well, I realized that was going to be the protagonist. But I thought there was some irony in her turning out to be the main character. But she is, I just think she's the most intriguing character in the book, and so I wanted the cover to be a portrait of her.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because what strikes me, and perhaps may others that read your book, and I really hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, but two characters that I'm impressed with by their strength and description and the way you describe them are women, both Bama and Alicia. What made you decide that your protagonist and antagonist were both strong female figures?
Oh, that's a great question. Before I answer, I'll just say wait until you meet Agatha. There's another female character in the book that is stronger than both of them. And certainly wiser than both of them, because they're both very sure of themselves, and they're both kind of young and haven't had the benefit of being mothers yet, or they're very, very militaristic in their view of the world. They view it the way they view it, and that's it. And if you disagree, They have a problem with that, and they don't want you in their life. But they also form a dichotomy because they oppose each other. And, the first novel that I wrote had a female protagonist, and that was written mainly against a largely male or male feeling antagonist. The bad guy in that book, which is called To Serve a King, was kind of like the bad guy in Lord of the Rings. Like, you couldn't really see him. He didn't have like a form, but you knew it was a male power. And so it was this woman versus man, this young woman versus old man kind of concept. And it was just very tired. That young woman versus old man thing has just been done and done and done into oblivion. So I really wanted this to be a woman versus woman struggle, but also have two female characters that are deep enough that they can overcome their problems with each other, hopefully, and maybe realize that they have more in common than they don't.
I obviously from the way you answered the one question, I haven't gotten completely through yet, but from what I have been able to get through in your novel so far, this book definitely isn't for the faint of heart. It has some very graphic points within it, like Alicia's execution in front of a farmer as one of your characters happens to watch this happen. Not to mention some sensitive and somewhat disturbing things that may be offensive to certain readers. Do you feel as though the reader is prepared leading up to these before they occur from your previous descriptions of the characters, or do you aim for the shock value?
Yeah, I do kind of aim for it because I feel like it's reality, and I feel like, if these kinds of things happen in real life and we know that they do, then why do we sugarcoat our fiction so that it doesn't reflect the life in the world in which we live? For me, Failsafe, it was a project to sort of process and deal and comprehend with the world in which I live. And in the world I live, there are terrible things that happen. So why should such terrible things be excluded from the struggle of my characters, even though they're going on an adventure that has nothing to do, well, it has something to do with the real world, but it's still a fantasy,
Correct.
right? But so in order to inject realism, there does have to be a lot of violence, and frankly, there's a lot of vulgarity in the book too. But literally, the book takes place in a brothel. You would expect that there's going to be references to sex and nudity and lewd acts and things like that.
Understandable. Absolutely.
I think the scene that you're talking about is a scene in which one of the main female characters has no problem whatsoever with her men raping
exactly.
another woman, and and that's the brutality of it is meant to say, hey, look, there is no solidarity anymore. Women don't run together. They don't roll together. Here's a woman in command of a bunch of men, and she has no problem with them raping.
And yeah. And she didn't, and yet she still showed very much authority and force, and was quite relentless in that part of the book. Well,
she's got some family ties that she needs to get figured out.
It definitely that part definitely got my attention, and I think anybody that reads it, it's an attention getter for sure.
Yeah, it's Alicia. She's obsessed with figuring out a mystery in her family.
She's a very strong woman, though. I mean, both Bama and Alicia's characters, and like you brought up Agatha, I kind of have an inkling who she may be, but yeah, those characters are definitely very strong women. Kind of again started to say a little something something else that I wanted to ask you about. And there's typically certain life events that prompt one to write a novel, or at least inspire or characterize those within it. What do you feel were the things that made you decide to write Failsafe when you did?
Well, I'll answer that two ways. The first way is to say that I had read some books that really inspired me from a subject matter standpoint and from a conceptual standpoint. One of them was Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which is very much a sort of, it's an old time Americana kind of story, but it also doesn't pull any punches. It's a very honest story. It doesn't apologize for using offensive language. It doesn't apologize for putting characters together that society at the time said shouldn't be together. Mm-hmm. A young boy with an escaped slave. I mean, that was unheard of in those days. Even in retrospect, from the time period that Mark Twain was writing in. But that book really, really influenced my decision to put Failsafe in not necessarily the time period, but the context of a silly Western. And so I wanted the characters to be kind of, hillbillies who apparently maybe weren't all that smart at first blush, but then when you spend some time with them, you realize they're incredibly intelligent people. And that's true of Tom Sawyer, and it's true of Huckleberry Finn in Mark Twain's book.
And what period, though? Because for me, and again, maybe I've conceptualized what you've written differently than what you have maybe anticipated or expected a reader to think about it. But what time period would you say that this is?
Well, if you had to guess,
I think it to me, it feels like a future that has become very bleak, and a culmination of both a almost a communist or a militaristic era with Western entanglement.
Yeah, well, I think that's a pretty good read, because it's definitely a dystopian, it's a future gone wrong piece.
It's totally taken back from like the way we view society today. It's
a retrograde,
past,
yeah.
But it's the past, but it's like,
yeah, there's enough things in their lives present that it's not the past, it's the future. And I think it's a pretty good read to say that there's a strong communist influence. Although this particular kind of groupthink is very religious,
almost like a dictatorship.
Yeah, like Big Brother. What I wanted to do with The Debt Mother was find out, okay, let's take George Orwell and let's adapt some of that themology from 1984, where he has Big Brother, which is like this omniscient government sort of force that's present in everybody's life. And I wanted to say, well, wait a minute, what if there was something that existed outside the influence of Big Brother? And, maybe it's these primitive people that everybody that loves Big Brother kind of makes fun of, because that's what Big Brother tells him to do. And so in my book, I've got this society that's based around a religious belief that has to do with banking and money printing, and this goddess that they refer to as the Debt Mother. And that was kind of the way I equated the George Orwell approach of having this monstrous phantom enemy that you're not really sure if they actually exist or not. Mm-hmm. But everybody believes them, so you don't want to be on the wrong side of history, kind of thing. But yeah.
So probably a very easy question for you to answer. But the town of Temperance, I mean, by definition, action, thought, feeling of restraint, You know, you talk about how she owns a brothel, moderation in or abstinence of the use of alcoholic beverage. And here, you know, it's like she has the drink, you know, that these people come to consume at her establishment. You know, it's so I see. I'm just curious. I mean, was that your thoughts?
Well, when you see, So why is the
why
place that
Temperance?
Tommy is
Why
from
Temperance?
called Temperance?
Yes,
When there's so little temperance going on.
exactly.
Well, you know, Tommy Dick is the sheriff of Temperance, but he has to travel very, very far to get to Bama's place because he's investigating a murder. That's how the story opens, more or less. He discovers a dead body in the second chapter, and the leader of the village of Temperance sends him to investigate this murder and find out what's going on and return another kid that's gone missing back to the village. But, you know, I like to think of Temperance as being an indicator of how Tommy's character is played out, because Tommy is a very mellow, relaxed, and outwardly not smart kind of cop. He doesn't carry a gun. He refuses to carry a gun. He's never held a gun. He's never shot a gun. He just has a baton, which he can hit things with. But he's a very considerate and just real thoughtful kind of hillbilly kind of sheriff.
Well, and being a sheriff too, and one of the scenes that I alluded to, you know, it took an incredible amount of restraint, I think, for any man to witness what he did and not react in the kind of, you know.
Well, that's because he's on a mission, right? He knows if he blows his cover during that situation, he's not going to solve his crime, and he's not going to go back to his leader with a solved crime and a verdict.
True, but I'm just showing
and he
parallel.
Doesn't care about the outskirts. He cares about his village. That's where his loyalties lie. So the stuff that's going on with Alicia and her tormenting of these poor farmers, he doesn't like it, but he also knows that there's probably nothing he can do about it, and he's got a crime to solve, and that's got to be where his focus is.
Well, now that I know that you're Nigel's brother, I would love...
He didn't tell you that, huh?
No, he didn't. But I would love to hopefully have you maybe do like a 3-way on our podcast one time. That would be really great. It's been a pleasure, TJ, for those of ours that are listening, who may be interested in getting a copy or listening to a copy of Failsafe. You can get one on Amazon.com. It's available on Kindle and audiobook on audible.com. Again, this is Failsafe with TJ Wall. TJ, thank you again for
You're welcome.
coming.
Thank you, Jazmine. And tell Nigel that he needs to show up next time.